Hello, good morning, welcome back. This is Mr. Lauria's online class, Frederick Douglass, lecture 3. This will be chapter 2 today. Welcome. I'm in my little coffee shop. I love this place. Check it out. It's like a rainforest. This morning I woke up and I was like, what do I want to do? And I decided, come talk about Frederick Douglass. So, alright, here we go. Chapter 2. In Chapter 1, we looked at lots of different things, but in my opinion, most importantly, the things that were denied slaves, self-knowledge, family love. We talked about some of the sexual dynamics between master and slave. Chapter 2 is short, it's brief. And we're going to talk about two important things in Chapter 2, power structure and music. And this is a book, as I've mentioned before, is not really about the everyday aspects of slavery, right? There are other books that did cover that. We got whipped, we got beaten, we got this and that, and Douglass does do that in this book. He does. You kind of have to. I feel the book of slavery, but his book is a much deeper exploration. And he gets to this later, but there's a quote, and he talks about what was the white man's power to ensnare and enslave the black man, right? So this book, I think, more explores that power. It's Douglass saying, how is it that all these people convince all these people to be their slaves, right? What's that power? So in this chapter, we're going to talk about power, more than we're going to talk about that they only got, coarse linen shirt and little meals. That's covered too. And if you want to get into that, that's fine. But I think let's go a little bit deeper. So, power. Colonel Lloyd and music. Colonel Lloyd. Douglass starts off by describing the structure of Colonel Lloyd's house. And he talks about later in the book that, slaves are like anyone else. They kind of have their hierarchy, right? It's like if you go to a bar, right, and tell a girl, listen, I drive a Mercedes, right? Or I drive a broken piece of crap Honda Civic, right? There's that. You'd rather say Mercedes, right? So slaves prefer to work for somebody that's successful. Colonel Lloyd is very successful, and in several plantations, several different properties, and essentially it's set up almost like a self-sustaining government. He basically runs his own government. 300 to 400 slaves just on the home plantation, number of farms nearby that kind of run through him. The home plantation was, quote, the seat of government for the whole 20 farms. All disputes among the overseers were settled here, right, with Colonel Lloyd. Another thing that happened here, right, so the overseers, all these 20 plantations, if they had a problem, they would come, boom, to this one place, right? Another thing is the slaves of all the other farms received their monthly allowance of food and their yearly clothing here. So they would, again, come to this one place, right? So the overseers settle disputes, right? Slaves also get their food here and their clothes. So it's the center of power, right? Everything comes through here. And that's symbolic. It's also important. It reminds me a little bit of the Spanish conquistador method. Dogs are freaking out, right? The Spanish conquistador method, where they would come into a town, they would rip apart its existing structure, they'd pop up a church, and they would give the natives all their food from the church, right? They had to go to that church, and that's reinforcing again that this is the place that provides to you, right? You come here, we'll give you something, right? But you're reminded of that power every time that you physically go to that location. So that's where disputes are settled, the home plantation, and where the slaves get their clothing and their yearly food. Both there, right? So it becomes a symbol of power. Colonel Lloyd is elevated. He does talk about, listen, we slept on the ground, etc. My man Dontrell, when he was reading this book, that was one of his favorite passages where Douglass is talking about how the children, don't have shoes, stockings, jackets, right? They had 2 linen shirts a year, that's it. So he does talk about that. No beds were given it. We had to sleep on the ground. Sometimes it gets so cold that we could, our skin would crack and you could put your finger in it. So Douglas does talk about those things. And he talks about some of the different people, but I don't really feel like their names are that important. Not yet, right? Colonel Lloyd is important. So back to that home plantation, that village, that seat of power. There's an interesting quote later in this chapter. It says, "Few privileges were esteemed higher by the slaves of those outfars than being selected to do errands at the great house farm," capital letters, right? It was associated in their minds with greatness. It was a great privilege to be sent there. It was a great privilege to be allowed to go to the great house farm. Right? Again, so I feel like Douglas is interested in that. He's like, how does the white man enslave the black man? Well, here, look at how Colonel Lloyd has elevated himself. Suddenly it's a privilege to go be allowed to get your food at this one house. So I feel like he's interested in that. He's exploring that a little bit. Moving into the second main point of this chapter, in my mind, is music. Music. As I mentioned, this is a book that's about way more than just slavery, the everyday aspect of slavery. Do you like music? Think about that, right? What do you like about music? I love music. Music it's abstract, if you think about it. It's a creative form. It's one of the only kind of invisible creative art forms. It travels across sound waves, right? You take it in, you acknowledge it, you experience it in a certain way. Music's unique like that. So music is, beautiful. It's important, and Douglas talks about it here. Now, the slaves, when they would go to the house farm, they'd often sing songs along the way, right? And there was a notion that Douglas gets to, and he says, okay, everyone knows that slaves sing. And actually, if you see Blazing Saddles, the very first scene of Blazing Saddles, Mel Gibson, there's a reference that, oh, you're slaves, shouldn't you be singing, right? People expect that. So, slaves sing, right? Why do they sing on the way to this plantation, right? Douglas says, listen, there are some people that say slaves are happy. Look, they sing, right? So you can't be sad and be singing, right? They must be singing because they're happy. Look at, they're so happy, right? Douglas disagrees very strongly. And it's absolutely fascinating, I feel like, this passage. He talks about sitting in the woods and hearing about sitting in the woods and hearing these songs, and talks about them reverberating for miles around at once with the highest joy and the deepest sadness. Interesting to juxtapose highest joy and deepest sadness at the same time. They would sing, right? Let's talk about what they're singing and then why they're singing it. They would sing, this is quote, unmeaning jargon, but which, nevertheless, was full of meaning to themselves. That's an interesting point, right? He's saying that externally it's unmeaning jargon. That these words don't even make sense. Internally, it does. It does to them. It's prompted by something. Right? It's prompted by an emotion. The last sentence of this this chapter, he talks about the same emotion that would prompt a man who was stranded on an island by himself to sing. So it's just kind of like a very sorrowful song, right? You're singing this song that externally it's just jargon. Internally is where it counts. I did not, when a slave, understand the deep meaning of those rude and apparently incoherent songs. This paragraph right here is one of the best in the entire story. They told a tale of woe, which was then altogether beyond my feeble comprehension, I would say the same. Right? And my feeble comprehension can't really grasp how profound these songs must have been. But, he says, they were prayers and complaints of souls boiling over with bitter anguish. Every tone was a testimony against slavery and a prayer to God for deliverance from chains. Right? He's saying they're not singing because they're happy. No, they're singing because they have this profound anguish in their souls, this deep sorrow. They're praying to God to be delivered from their chains. Whoa. And Douglas says that as he is writing about, even as he's thinking about these songs, An expression of feeling has already found its way down my cheek, right? To think of these songs which he heard as a child being sung by slaves on the way to this farm is affecting him so powerfully that as he writes about it, he cries. Listen to this. These songs still follow me to deepen my hatred of slavery, to quicken my sympathies for my brethren in bonds. Right? These songs still haunt me. They still have them in me, right? And they just make me hate slavery that much more and make me love my brothers and the fellow slaves that much stronger. Check this out. If anyone wishes to be impressed with the soul-killing effects of slavery, let him go to Colonel Lloyd's plantation, and on allowance day, place himself in deep pine woods, and let him there in silence analyze the sounds that pass through the chambers of his soul. Analyze the sounds that pass through the chambers of his soul. And if he is not thus impressed, it is only because, quote, there is no flesh in his obdurate heart. That's saying something. I mean, how'd he really even add to that? He says, if you can go and you can listen to these songs and you can let those sounds pass through the chambers of your soul, a beautiful way to talk about music, right? If you are not moved, you don't have a heart. It's beautiful. So, absolutely fascinating. I just want to leave it with that, basically. So, power structure, Colonel Lloyd's plantation being the seat of power, and how, again, Douglas is turning this over. How did they do this to us? And then music, right? He says this is not like, hey, we're so happy, No, it's much more profound than that. So, beautiful chapter. I hope at this point you're getting aware that Douglas is one of a kind thinker. All right, so thank you.